Hello, welcome to the West Virginia Author Show. I'm your host, Kat Pleska, and with me today I have published writer and soon-to-be author, Anna Rollins. Hi, Anna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you on here. So, to help the audience understand who you are and where you come from, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Anna Rollins, and I am a term instructor at Marshall University. I teach in the English department. I direct the Writing Center there too. I've been doing that for the last 10 years. I was born in Charleston, West Virginia, so this is my hometown. I currently live in Huntington with my husband and my 3 kids, George, who's 7, Charlie, who's 5, and then I have a 3.5-month-old named Alice, and we have 2 beagles too.
What's the beagles' names?
Addie and Rory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. So that's a very lovely growing family.
Yeah, it's full. It's a full house.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure, yeah, and a full-time job, just taking care of the children as well as working at Marshall. I did not realize we're in the same department. I did not realize you had been with the Writing Center for 10 years. That's quite a long time.
Yeah, I started directing it in 2014, and before that, I got my undergraduate and graduate degree at Marshall, and I was a tutor for 5 years in the Writing Center before that. So.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
good, very important department or function or availability of opportunity for students.
Yeah, I'm always so excited to tell people, like, this is a free resource. You can talk to an expert. We're staffed by grad students primarily. You can talk to an expert and get free writing feedback.
Yes,
so, yeah.
and it's for all disciplines because there is writing that takes place in all disciplines.
Yeah, we work with freshmen, but we've also worked with staff and people working on their dissertations and and sciences.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Keeps you hopping.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your role as a writer.
Yeah.
So when did you know when you first wanted to be a writer?
I feel like I've always known. I think my son recently graduated from kindergarten, and they tell like what they want to be when they grow up. And I wanted to be an artist, but I had writing in mind. It reminded me of that because my son said the same thing. So we'll see.
Okay.
But I was writing all the time from a young age. I was sending out these unsolicited email magazines. I had one that I sent out to like any email address I could get a hold of, like my parents, friends, their coworkers. Like I sent it out at the age of 10. It was called It's a Girl Thing, and I think I spelled thing incorrectly. But I mean, people were not necessarily requesting it, but I was dedicated to writing it, and I ran my own website. I had several websites when I was in middle school, and so I was writing articles for my websites, and of course, like writing in journals and reading too. But yeah, so that's what I did in my free time when I was in middle school, and I guess I just thought, maybe I want to do this for the rest of my life. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
How did your teachers review your writing? Were they encouraging when you were in high school?
I think so. I think I held things back from school settings sometimes. Okay. Like I think that I was my most free and experimental, and I did things that I thought were most exciting, kind of like on my own time. My teachers were encouraging, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a little bit of a secret identity for a little bit, except for your friends and who you were sending emails
to. My poor father's coworkers. I don't know if I got their coworkers. I know that there were some people from church who were getting emails from me who probably didn't want them. So.
But it's a child, so we must encourage the child, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so you must have been a voracious reader. So what were the influences on you as far as your reading and as far as your writing?
Yeah. Oh, I read all the time. I mean, I read when I was in elementary school. I devoured the series books, which I think some people would think of as like trash, like The Babysitter's Club, The Boxcar Children, Nancy Drew. Like I think people kind of think of that as trash, but it like really taught me to love reading. And then I was spurred on to read like more of the classics. I remember loving Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, Jane Austen. And now I read a lot of contemporary writers. I like, I love Atessa Moshfegh. She's a contemporary American author. And she writes about the abject. Like she kind of forces people to look at uncomfortable things and just stare at them. And I really admire how she does that. I love writers who write about like the mystery of faith and beauty and goodness. So writers like Marilyn Robinson and
yes.
Flannery O'Connor.
She's not so much
Not just
uplifting,
beauty
but
and good-
she's
yeah.
an incredible writer.
Yeah, I mean, she really examines faith in this really complex way.
She does.
I love Lauren Winner. She reading her memoirs about faith and kind of like really approaching it in this very human, real way. She really influenced me.
Okay.
So, and now I read a lot of kids authors because I have a lot of kids. And so my 3.5-month-old, I've been like so pleased to be able to read baby books again. And I just keep reading Margaret Wise Brown to my daughter. Like I need to diversify her literary diet, but I love Margaret Wise Brown. She wrote Goodnight Moon and Runaway Bunny.
Yeah.
And I think she like really nails the surprise ending. Like, she has this really nice rhythm to all of her stories, but then at the end, she'll like turn it in this way that's always really interesting. And I just get a lot of pleasure out of reading her.
Okay.
So,
Okay, good. Do you write fiction at all? I know you write nonfiction. Do you write fiction at all?
I've tried. I'm not good at it. It always ends up being about my life. But I took a course 2 summers ago called Blueprint for a Book. It was through the hosts of the #AmWriting podcast. And so I went through this, I think it was like an 8-week course, and I basically outlined a novel, and then I worked with a coach to kind of help me work on the 3 acts of it.
Okay.
And then the following summer, last summer, I started the novel. So I had maybe 10,000 words before I found out I was expecting my 3rd child, and then it kind of went by the wayside. But
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, it may be something you return to.
Yeah, I think there's something there, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about your recent publishing success. I mean, you've been a writer all along. You've been doing quite well, but recently it's kind of exploded, and you've talked about that. And I want to mention some essays that you've published, and specifically one titled "Finger 11," which conjures up all kinds of imaginary things. Finger 11.
Yeah.
What might that be? And it's surprising what it turns out. Actually, it's pretty self-explanatory. So tell us about this one. It was published in Joyland magazine. So tell us about that story.
Yeah. So, the Finger 11 is me. It sounds like a band title, but
It does.
Yeah,
Good title.
or band name. Yeah. But I was born with an extra finger, so I had something called polydactyly, and so when my mother gave birth to me, she counted all my digits, and I had a 3rd thumb. So they had it removed when I was about 10 months old. I think I was 10 months old, which is what they recommend for it to happen that early.
Yes.
But in that essay, I kind of explore, I've always written about my 3rd thumb. I remember in undergrad, like writing something very short about it. But since I've recently had children myself, whenever I go to look at their ultrasounds, one of the first things I always did was I would look at their hands, because I was like, I wonder if they too will have an additional digit. And I've read a lot about the causes of it, and some of it can just happen kind of spontaneously. You don't know the cause, but sometimes they attribute it to exposure to chemicals during the prenatal period. And my mother was exposed to toxic chemicals. Her mother was prescribed something called DES, which was something prescribed to pregnant women who had experienced losses from like the 1950s to the 1970s. And they ended up stopping prescribing it because they realized that it caused cancer it induced cancer during the prenatal period for babies who had been exposed to it. So my mother does. Thank goodness she didn't have as severe an outcome as many of the babies did. But she had all these issues with fertility herself. And she had to go through a number of interventions while she was pregnant with both my brother and I. But she gave birth to me, and I seem fine, except I have this additional digit. And so I'm kind of weaving in, that essay kind of weaves together like her story and my grandmother's story and my own fertility journey. And I kind of reflect upon like how exposure to toxic chemicals affects both the physical health, but also like the mental health of individuals involved.
Yeah, and you speak, I think this is the one that you talk about, Chemical Valley, in Kanawha County.
So I was born in Chemical Valley.
Yeah. So your grandmother would have been probably living in, probably when it was at its worst, and your mother probably would have been still there, but cleaning up. And part of that is due to the chemicals companies leaving. The valley. So your grandmother would have been exposed possibly somehow as well, since she took the DES?
Well, I'm kind of thinking of separate chemicals, but around the time we started trying for a family, it was the same time as the West Virginia water crisis.
Yes.
And I remember, I think I start the essay with this scene, going out to dinner or going out to lunch with my mom, and the spill had happened, but it had not been reported yet. And we're at Pies and Pints, and we're both drinking water. And my mom just says, like, I'm not going to drink this. This doesn't taste right. Like, she was on it. She knew. And I was like, oh, that's silly. Like, and I just kept drinking, which is kind of characteristic of like our relationship. She's very careful, and she tends to like know when danger is there. And I tend to be like, oh, it's fine. And then maybe I'm wrong. So, yeah.
Okay, all right. And then another essay that you wrote, which was published in Shondaland, is called Playing the Piano Badly, Relieve Me of Perfectionism. And what I want to say about perfectionism is I don't know any writer, or very few writers, that aren't perfectionists. And there's specific reasons for that. So tell us about that essay.
So I was thinking about how I took up playing the piano during COVID because I was very stressed. My husband worked on the COVID floor. My youngest son had been hospitalized multiple times for respiratory illnesses and was diagnosed with asthma. So I was just convinced that my husband was going to, bring it home to our son. And so one day my husband was like, you need a hobby. I'm like, I have hobbies. I'm a writer and I'm a runner. And he's like, no, those aren't hobbies. Those are compulsions. Like, you need a hobby. And so one day my children were just at each other's throats. They were, how old? Like 1 and 3. They're fighting. 2 boys. And I'm like, I just sat down and started playing the piano. And I wasn't very good at it. It wasn't anything I'd done since childhood for the most part. But it was so nice. It was like I could be in my body and escape my head for a little while. And I was making something beautiful, but like it wasn't always beautiful, but it also didn't matter because the great thing about like music as an art, at least if you're not recording it, is you don't have this permanent record to like look back at later and judge.
Good point.
Yeah, like with writing, I can go back there and think to myself like, oh gosh, that sentence, I could have tightened that up, or that adverb doesn't need to be there. Like I'm trying to like cut all the time. But you can't do that when I wasn't recording it. So So the essay is about how freeing it can be to take up a hobby that you're bad at and you have no intention of getting any better at. Like,
yeah. It's really like play. Like
Yeah.
when we were children and we didn't, maybe Barbie had a nice top on, but we didn't have any pants to put on her, and it didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was not perfect.
Right.
This sort of thing. So
You could just enjoy.
And there is no record of it. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it, but we as writers, we're constantly under judgment of some sort. Now, it might be a critical thought that's positive toward us or something, but it can be just as much the other way. So there's a lot online. And when I was getting my latest manuscript to my publisher, at the last minute I thought, how many the word that do I have in there? So I did a word search and it was, I don't know, 35 that's or something like that, and I managed to take out most of those because you don't need it. There's a reason for it at times.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, because it's the way we speak.
Yeah.
We don't think about,
Well, and it's wonderful that like you can do that.
Yeah.
But to be able to be free enough to not have to worry about all the that's for a little while. Yeah.
And probably nobody would notice, but other writers like us.
Right, yeah.
that teach it like, oh man, there's a lot of that's in there.
Yeah, I spend my days marking up. I mean, I'm not like, but you're reading student papers and you're grading them. Like part of being a teacher is grading, so you're assessing.
All right, I want to get to Substack. So explain to us what a Substack is.
Okay, so Substack it's basically an email newsletter platform. But they kind of run it like a social media site. A lot of writers have been flocking there to put their work out there. It is blogging software, but the posts are sent directly to your subscribers' inboxes.
Okay.
So they don't have to go to a website to get it. They just open their inbox and receive it. And this is really nice for the writer because, especially like with Twitter, all the stuff going on with Twitter or X, like a lot of my friends who have worked on building platforms, they've talked about like if Twitter goes down, like I go down. I did all this work to like, expand my network and it's going down. But Substack, you have people's email addresses and they've opted into your newsletter. So in theory, if Substack goes down, you can go somewhere else with those email addresses. But a lot of journalists have been moving their work to Substack exclusively. And they'll monetize. Like, so I write a free Substack, but Substack gives you the option of monetizing and people can opt in or opt out to that. One of my favorite writers on Substack, Virginia Soulsmith, has a newsletter called Burnt Toast, and she used to write for prestige media like the New York Times and Slate. But she has turned her attention entirely to her newsletter. She has 50,000 subscribers, and she supports herself that way.
Wow.
And a lot of journalists have been going that route.
Yeah, it's a way to really supplement the income or even make a main income.
Or
and
to
people buy into it because they love what you're doing.
Or you can write about things that aren't in the zeitgeist, but still might be of interest to people.
Sure.
Or, when I'm pitching essays, I'm always thinking about like timeliness, and you don't have to worry about that on Substack. You have a little more freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially timely is, I think, your memoir.
Yeah.
Famished is the title of it, which is coming out next year, 2025. What was the name of the press? I forgot.
Eerdmans.
Eerdmans.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And there's you have a blurb here about your memoir. Is it possible to learn to take up space in a world where women are encouraged not to? That's very timely in the current news with what's going on about where women belong and don't belong and who gets to tell them where they belong and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you've brought an excerpt here. Your book will be out next year, and we'll all be looking forward to it. So why don't you read a little bit for us from your memoir?
Yeah, thank you. In math class, my teacher told us that just before her wedding, she prepared to fit into her dress by eating only a couple 100 calories a day. Did you know that's not enough for even a toddler to live on? She said it with feigned disgrace, But even as a 12-year-old, I knew she was bragging. I sat in class hunched over, arms pressed tightly into my abdomen, squinting at the chalky haze of numbers on the board. I had a prescription for glasses, but I'd quit wearing them that year for appearances. I had a headache by the time the final bell rang each day. For extra credit, we were to write down everything we ate for a week and the corresponding number of calories. We would be shocked, she said. Done, I thought to myself, gratified by this challenge. I'd been logging this information in a burgundy mead notebook for months, and I'd developed a shorthand, a cover for my notes should they be discovered by my mom or dad. 1A, 80C was short for 1 apple 80 calories. I was tall and thin, but I'd packed on 20 puberty pounds over the summer, and this felt like a situation that needed to be managed. When I turned my records in, I received my extra credit, but no response to the strict content of my submission. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted a look of concern. I wanted to be seen. I wondered if she read the numbers, if she thought I had miscalculated, if she just really didn't care. I continued to keep these records in notebooks buried at the bottom of my underwear drawer. With this practice, I could go somewhere other than my body and still remain in line, the quiet girl in school. I had a best friend in elementary who was known as the other quiet girl in school. She lived in a log mansion at the top of a giant hill deep in the woods. We would jump on her trampoline at night, exterior lights shining on the springs, and it felt like we were flying through the trees. Her mother, Renee, was a successful realtor, her fresh, blue-eyed face plastered on billboards. One day, after a home showing, a man began calling Renee repeatedly. Later, he appeared at her house, driving up and down their long driveway. Soon after, they came home to find their front door open, lingerie pulled from her chest of drawers, bras dangling from the deer mounts decorating the walls of their family room. They packed up immediately and left town. I didn't learn of the circumstances surrounding their move until the hurt of my only friend moving suddenly healed to a scar. Poor Renee, my mom said quietly, reflecting upon the consequences of a woman becoming too big, revealing too much. You should never put your picture up on a billboard.
Oh my goodness. I'm just sitting here absorbing that a little bit, that story. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's quite a remarkable story. Tell us a little bit more about your memoir. Why did you feel this was what compelled you to write about?
Yeah. So my memoir examines the way purity culture and diet culture intersect. And I look at the ways that religious language has been used to talk about dieting, like throughout centuries. And I've always been interested. I mean, when I was in college, I majored in creative writing, and I would never turn this stuff in because it felt too personal. But I would always write about the way our relationship with God affects the way we feel about food and about sex. And so this is what I would always write about whenever I would, just write for myself. And eventually I was like, this is what I really care about. This is what I'm interested in. This is the thing that keeps me up at night. I'm gonna just let myself write about it. So I wrote my story, and I ended up doing a lot of research and reporting for the book. I interviewed dozens of women. I asked the question, how did your experience in purity culture impact your relationship with your own body? And I asked this in a variety of mediums, and I had so many women who wanted to talk to me. I talked to them on the phone, and I include their stories in my memoir as well. So that's kind of how it came about.
Okay, so, and they all were, do you mention them by name in the stories, or they're just kind of anecdotal?
Yes,
Okay.
so I whenever I would interview them, I spoke to each of them on the phone. I would ask them, do you want to go by first name, last name, a pseudonym? Some of them had written about their experiences in other outlets, and so
Okay.
they
They were prepared to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I told them, I mean, what I was doing. I told them where I'd been publishing essays, and I was working on this book that at the time I was querying agents with the book proposal. And I told them kind of what the themes were in the book, and I wanted to hear their personal stories.
Okay. Okay. How does your family
Feel about it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes them nervous.
Most families are.
Yeah. But my mom is so supportive. Whenever I signed with my agent and I ended up going out on submission, and I feel like I was matched with my dream editor at Erdman's. I just feel like we really connected. And when I told my mom about it, she was so excited, and she said something to me, because I remember having some anxiety on my own part, and she said something to me. She's like, when you get older, you'll regret the things you really wanted to do that you never did.
My mother.
Yeah, and that meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you have friends who read your entire manuscript and gave you feedback?
Yes. So I started working on it. I mean, I'd been working on versions of it for probably at least a decade, but I started taking it very seriously during the pandemic. And I hired a few friends to give me feedback. Some of my coworkers gave me feedback. And then I worked with Courtney Mom, who does she's a writer who has written novels and a memoir, and she has a query doula service. And so
A query what?
query doula, like she comes
okay.
alongside you as you're like querying your manuscript.
Oh, interesting. I've not heard of that.
Yeah, so I hired her, and let's see. I worked with a wonderful developmental editor at one point. So I kind of pieced together my own like writing program with various people as I worked on it.
Absolutely. I mean, it takes a village sometimes to get our books out there, particularly when the subject matter is something that makes us a little nervous to put out there. We want to have, the feedback and the comfort of knowing that people are hearing you and understand and can help you with that development.
And I think my essay about like perfectionism and piano playing, I think that like there's so much freedom in just letting yourself do what you want to do and worry less about what people think. And knowing that, I remember always having this hang up, like, what if I write something and then 2 years later or 2 months later or 2 minutes later, I don't agree with it. Like, what if I change? And I've realized, I'm like, I'm allowed to play.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'm
Yes, you
allowed
certainly are.
to play with the things that I care about.
Yes.
And that's been incredibly freeing.
Yeah, and is it possible to learn to take up space in a world where women are encouraged not to? And I think your book is saying, I deserve to be in this place where I can tell my story, and it will help other people.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you every bit of good fortune with your book, and I look forward to it coming out next year and reading it, and perhaps I'll get to review it.
Oh, thank you.
I would love to.
I'm excited for your book.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for being here, Anna. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for visiting with us as West Virginia author, and we will see you next time.